What's up, Flannelverse? We are back for week 5, Thursday Night Football. We have the Tampa Bay Bucs at the Atlanta Falcons. Should be a fun game, potentially high-scoring game here. We're going to go position by position, quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, tight ends, defenses, kickers. On this show, I will play around with building some lineups at the end. I'll take any questions you have at the end. Thank you all for showing up. Really appreciate the support as usual. If you could, I am trying to just reach the goal on Monday. We did reach the goal of 3,000 subscribers. So really appreciate you all helping me out there. Now the goal, setting my sights on 5,000 by the end of the NFL season. If you are not already subscribed to the channel, would appreciate it. Trying to grow. Channel's not that old, but man, it was a grind all summer working on best ball, trying to grow the channel. Has been growing a lot better during DFS season. So really appreciate you, but onward and upward, trying to get to 5,000 at this point. Okay, we are going to go in again, position by position. We will start with quarterbacks here, and quarterbacks generally one of the more straightforward positions on the slate. That is the case tonight. Baker Mayfield and Kirk Cousins. Mayfield is at 9,600, Kirk Cousins at 8,600. Both are going to be moderately popular. In the captain spot, we have Baker Mayfield coming in at 10% projected ownership on Roto Grinders, Kirk Cousins coming in at 5% projected ownership. So that 5% number does interest me with Kirk Cousins. I imagine I'll be over 5% on Cousins. Just has the ability to put up a big score. Clearly does not project as well as Baker Mayfield. Actually, they're actually closer here than they are elsewhere. Yeah, only a point separating them. And Cousins is $1,000 cheaper. Sign me up for some Kirk Cousins at captain. In the flex, also both getting some ownership, as you would expect with quarterbacks on a showdown slate. Mayfield coming in at 47% ownership, Cousins at 36%. I like that number on Cousins too. Hard not to want to get over on Cousins in both spots, only coming in at about 41% total ownership. Maybe not the best spot in the world for Cousins. And I showed this on the morning slate, but I'll show it again here. The fantasy points, schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed per game metric is up. They don't put this up until 4 weeks into the season, until they have a big enough sample size where they deem it, worth looking at least. Still we're dealing with very small sample sizes here. But something that we can look at going forward. And as you can see here, Tampa Bay has been not actually a terrible defense for opposing quarterbacks. However, that is mostly, they break it down over here. They are a negative matchup for quarterbacks in terms of throwing the ball. Quarterbacks have not thrown the ball particularly well against Tampa Bay. They have, however, been really good running the ball against Tampa Bay. So that doesn't really benefit Kirk Cousins. Not a great matchup for Kirk Cousins based on what we've seen so far this year. Again, small sample size. I think of it as being kind of a middling matchup with the Buccaneers defense. I don't think it's, one that I'm really afraid of, but also not the great matchup that it looks like here, because that's a lot of running fantasy points that quarterbacks have scored against the Bucs. Atlanta a little bit lower, and they are similarly worse against the run than against the pass. They're giving negative 3.2 fantasy points below expectation. So tougher matchup for Baker Mayfield against Atlanta. Still interest there. Again, they give up more on the ground, which doesn't really benefit for Baker Mayfield. He's rushed for like 16 yards per game this year. He does have a couple rushing touchdowns, but he's generally not going to be a quarterback who puts up a lot of fantasy points on the ground. So neither of these is a particularly standout matchup for these quarterbacks. I think they're both kind of middling in terms of what you can expect, but with Kirk Cousins coming in at relatively low ownership, I don't mind a middling matchup. I'm totally fine playing Kirk Cousins in a middling matchup. As far as correlations go, neither of these is a particularly great rushing quarterback. Baker Mayfield, as I said, does have a couple rushing touchdowns already this year, 16 yards per carry. So you could consider playing him in the flex unstacked. I don't think I would. I think even in a 150 set, I'm probably setting a rule that if I have Baker Mayfield in my lineup, I want at least one pass catcher from the Bucs along with him. And when I have Baker Mayfield at captain, I might allow for just a single pass catcher in the flex, but generally I'd prefer to have multiple pass catchers if I have Baker Mayfield at captain. I think that is much more likely to hit. Now, again, he scored a couple rushing touchdowns. Maybe he can continue to do that. But generally, I think Baker Mayfield more likely to score his fantasy points through the air. So I would rather have multiple pass catchers in the flex if I have Baker Mayfield at captain. Kirk Cousins, just a complete stash, who actually has negative rushing yards, -2 rushing yards on the season. Never playing Kirk Cousins without at least one pass catcher. If I have him in the flex, always requiring at least 2 pass catchers. Because again, the scoring dynamics on DraftKings are such that if Kirk Cousins is too concentrated on one pass catcher, that pass catcher is probably going to outscore him. The pass catcher outscores a quarterback on every pass. They score more. They score a point for every reception. They also score more per yard, more per touchdown. So it's really easy for a pass catcher to outscore the quarterback if the quarterback is too concentrated on that one pass catcher. So for a quarterback who doesn't run to be optimal, generally they're going to need to bring along multiple pass catchers. So you typically want multiple pass catchers in the flex if you are using a non-rushing quarterback at captain. I think that basically does it for quarterback. It's pretty straightforward. Neither of these guys great rushing quarterbacks in general. So you're going to want to stack them, particularly when in the captain spot, you want to be double stacking these quarterbacks. Deeg says most other sites have Kirk around 45 to 50%. Is that total ownership or flex ownership? Yeah, that's more reasonable to me. I think I'll get over the RotoGrinders numbers. If Kirk is in about 50% of my lineups total, I think I'm cool with that. Probably 10 to 15. Like I don't think I'm going to go 20, 25% Kirk in the captain spot. It's still, I'd prefer to have, pass catchers, skill position players in the captain spot. But if he's going to be 5%, I think I might set a rule that I get at least 8-10% Kirk Cousins in the captain, something like that. So not like going way overboard on Kirk Cousins, but I think I'll have a larger portion of my Kirk split in the captain spot. What's up, Baldy? Good to see you. I know you're good to break any news. If we get any news pre-game, I know you'll let me know. Dustmaster says this feels like the hardest showdown I've done this season. Feels like a leave money on the table slate. It's a weird one because the player pools are so condensed. Like we just don't have that many awesome options. The teams are pretty condensed in terms of target trees, in terms of who is going to touch the ball. So we don't have a ton of off the wall options we can play. It does feel like a leave salary on the table if you want to avoid dupes kind of slate. I think this is a slate where you're just not going to have. You're pretty unlikely to have a solo winner. It's going to be really tough to win solo. You kind of have to accept some level of duping, I think, on this slate. But you can still try to avoid some of the most dupe lineups by just leaving some salary on the table. I think I'm going to in a lot of my lineups. Aku says it's almost flannel season here in Minnesota. Yeah, I'm wearing my flannel. It is 64 here in St. Paul. Still a little bit warm for flannel, but we're doing it anyway. All right. Crutches says he is going to be solo. All right. Well, good luck to you, Crutches. I look forward to seeing the lineup that you have that solo and wins the whole thing. All right. Enough about the quarterbacks. I think we covered everything well enough with the quarterbacks. Yeah, we're just stacking. Probably going to be overweight to the field on Kirk Cousins. Mayfield ownership seems fine to me, not really standing out one way or another. Bijan Robinson, we'll start with the Atlanta side at running back. And actually, I have to remember to move the sidebar down to running back. Bijan Robinson, the top projected play on the slate by kind of a wide margin here, 17.8 fantasy point projection from Fantasy Points. He is 9,800. Take a look at the ownership on Bijan, coming in at 18% projected ownership in the captain spot. In the flex, we have Bijan coming in at 45% ownership. While we're here, let's take a look at Tyler Algier as well. Those are the only two running backs that I'm considering from Atlanta. Algier in the captain spot coming in at, 4% projected ownership. In the flex, we have Algier coming in at 22% projected ownership. So a lot of ownership going to both of these running backs, both Algier and Bijan coming in with quite a bit of ownership. Actually, let me remind myself, Bijan coming in, 18% projected ownership. I kind of like that number. I think even at 18%, I might end up overweight to Bijan. Let's take a look at, so this is, again, schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed. Tampa Bay is, looks like, I'm not going to count that, around 11th in terms of schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. So pretty good spot in general for running backs, but even better when you break it down by fantasy points allowed receiving. Tampa Bay is second in the NFL this year in terms of fantasy points allowed through the air. So it's looked like a great spot for a running back like Bijan, who does a lot of damage through the air. He's a great receiving running back. So I do think this sets up as a really nice spot for Bijan Robinson. Somebody in James Rowley, I want to say, pointed out in a comment to my earlier video that part of the reason that the matchup has looked tougher for running backs against Tampa Bay, that part of the reason that running backs haven't scored even more against Tampa Bay has been that 4 different touchdowns have been scored by quarterbacks on the ground. We've had Jalen Hurts, Bo Nix, another running back, have combined to score 4 touchdowns on the ground against Tampa Bay. I might remember that. Is it Tampa Bay or Atlanta? Who's in my mind, I had it as Tampa Bay. It was going to be good for Bijan, but let me actually double check myself. I don't want to be wrong about what this number was. Something that I just saw that this comment before I came on, and I thought it was interesting. Yeah, Tampa hasn't. This is what James Robel said. Tampa hasn't given many points to running backs, but that's misleading. Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix, and Jalen Hurts combined for 4 goal line touchdowns. So I do think that is worth noting with someone like Bijan, because they've allowed some fantasy points to the running back position. They haven't been great against the run anyway, but it could be even better for running backs against Tampa Bay. Again, looking around 11th there. And as I noted earlier, and this is Fantasy Guru Drew, I saw him in chat, pointed this out to me, and I appreciated the note from Fantasy Guru Drew. Both of these teams, and I can just say it without even pulling it up, both of these teams bottom 3 in terms of stuff rate. Tampa Bay, actually the worst defense in the league in terms of stuffing the run so far this year. Atlanta, the 3rd worst in the league in terms of stuffing the run. And what that means, I'll read it off here. Percentage of carries that are stuffed is any run that does not result in a first down or touchdown, less than 4 yards on first down, or less than 3 yards on any other down. So both of these defenses, I think, are a little bit susceptible to the run game. You add in Bijan's passing game role and how bad they've been at stopping running backs through the air. I think this is a really nice spot for Bijan. I might actually end up overweight to the field on Bijan in particular. And we can look at the bell cow report a little bit, break it down. So I have this by game here. So I have it separated. You can see kind of the splits. Bijan in week 4, so the most recent game, just 7 carries. He still had 4 targets on 58% route participation. He has 5 targets in 2 different games this year. Just always going to be fairly involved in the passing game. Tyler Algier, though, did kind of take on more of a role last week. Had 8 carries, saw a couple targets, 33.3% route participation. Algier was pretty involved last week. The coaches said after the game that it was just a hot hand situation. He was looking good, so they let him keep going. So we know that threat is there with Tyler Algier, but I don't really expect it to be a common thing for Tyler Algier to significantly eat into Bijan's workload. I think like Bijan's always going to have a pretty significant role. He's just been really good. So I'm not that worried about the Tyler Algier situation. It is something that they told us this summer that Tyler Algier was going to have a big role. There were going to be certain games where Tyler Algier, they're going to lean on him more. We saw that last week. I don't think that's something that I'm going to expect every week. So I like Bijan quite a bit. I'm not afraid of the Tyler Algier stuff. And as far as Tyler Algier himself goes, I think he's playable. I think I'm probably going to end up a little bit light on Tyler Algier. So this is different than the way I usually play things. Often on these slates, I'm going underweight to the field on the starting running back, playing more of the backup. But here we have Tyler Algier actually getting pretty significant ownership. And I think it's largely based on what he did last week. 4% captain ownership. We have 22% in the flex. So with Tyler Algier getting so much ownership, and he is 4,800 in the flex also, so he's not the cheapest RB2 that you're going to have on a slate. I think you can get away. I think I'm going to get away from some of that Tyler Algier ownership. Not like a full fade, but I see myself getting more to like 18% total, as opposed to, the field's at 26%, not like taking a huge stand there on Algier, but I do think that's a spot where probably going to be a little bit lighter on Algier, a little bit heavier on Bijan than the field is in general. I just think, maybe they lean into Bijan's talents a little bit more here. I will say I'll have some lineups that have both of them in it. I have no issue running Bijan and Tyler Algier, just hoping that they're able to run all over Tampa Bay. Even with Bijan in the captain spot, I'm totally fine having both there. All right, and this is GD says Vita Vea is back. I think good reminder to look at inactives. I waited on the show to wait for inactives to come out and then have not actually seen what they are. So let me look real quickly at the Buccaneers inactives. I mean, that is certainly a boost for the running game if Vita Vea is back. We have both of the receivers out that we were expecting. Anton Winfield Jr. is out. Yeah, Vita Vea not on the injury report. Hang on. 1 second here. Oops. Because that does change the equation a little bit for what you can expect for the run game. Yep. Vita Vea is back. That is a good note in terms of looking at how they've done it against running back so far, because he's missed a couple games already, I believe. So do appreciate that call out. That is a knock against Bijan. I don't really think it's going to affect the fantasy points you can expect from him through the air. I do think that does hurt a little bit in terms of stuff rate. Like they've been bad in terms of stuff rate. Certainly going to be better with Vita Vea there. So I do appreciate that. That was a good note on Vita Vea. I still think maybe more reason to lean into Bijan, because I don't think it's going to affect how good the Bucs are at stopping running backs through the air. Maybe does hurt Tyler Algier a little bit more than Bijan. Certainly not good for Bijan though either. Still involved in the running game quite a bit as well. But yeah, that's definitely a good note there on Vita Vea. So yeah, I think I'm going to end up a little bit higher on the field on Bijan, a little bit lower than Tyler Algier. I don't think I have anything else to say about the Falcons. As far as the Bucs go, pretty interesting as well. Both Rachaad White and Bucky Irving got 10 carries last week, and they're pretty similar in price. Rachaad White 6,800, Bucky Irving 6,400. The projection not all that different for the two of them, and we can pull up the bell cow report here for the Buccaneers last week as well. So we had Bucky Irving last week, 10 carries, his most in his career. I guess this is rookie 10 carries last week, most he's ever had. 26% route participation, highest route participation he's ever had as well. Saw 2 targets. That's the second best in terms of targets in a game. So I guess he has two with 3 targets, 1 with 2, but seeing that route participation go up, seeing the carries go up, things looking good for Bucky Irving. All of the coach peak seems to suggest he might take on more of the role as well. Bucky Irving this week, Todd Bowles said, we need to have both of them. Both of them need to be part of our game plan. Even sometimes I'll run them together. So everything looking pretty good for Bucky Irving in general. But with all of that said, I still think I prefer Rachaad White if the ownership is going to be similar. I think I'm going to play a good amount of both of them. So I think this is actually a spot where I'm going to lean into the run game a little bit. Let's look at the ownership. Rachaad White projected for just 4% captain ownership. Bucky Irving projected for 3% captain ownership. I might end up above weight to the field on both of those numbers. I think both are pretty solid plays here. And then in the flex, we have Rachaad White at 21% ownership, Bucky Irving at 25% ownership. So I think I prefer Rachaad White to Bucky Irving at lower ownership, pretty similar costs, just because, again, you look at the usage, similar last week. They had the exact same 10 carries last week, 39% snap share for Bucky Irving. We still had Rachaad White at 60.8% snap share. So still taking on more snaps. Also 46% route participation for Rachaad White, more involved in the passing game so far. That doesn't mean that's necessarily going to hold up, but on the year, what is this? 16 total targets on the year for Rachaad White. We have 8 total for Bucky Irving. So he's been more involved in the passing game, running more routes. I think I prefer Rachaad White if they're going to be, if Bucky Irving's going to get higher ownership at essentially the same salary. I prefer Rachaad White, but again, I like both of these running backs. I think I'm going to end up overweight to the field on both running backs, so I don't want that to sound like I'm not a fan of Bucky Irving too, but I think I'm going to be more overweight to the field on Rachaad White than Bucky Irving. If we look at schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed, again, where's Atlanta rank? There, it's not a great matchup. So again, both to the run and the pass, Atlanta has been a pretty tough defense so far. But again, not very good in terms of stuff rate. So I think that can be a little bit misleading with a small sample size. I think that it's good to look at these numbers. I lean on it quite a bit. This little chart for just like a general idea of, okay, how is this defense doing against that position? But I do think with the small sample size, looking at the stuff rate, I do think little things like just having goal line carries, penalties at the goal line can lead to more opportunities, more touchdowns for running back. That can be a lot can sway, in a small 4-game sample size. So I'm not going to read too much into it. I'm going to read more into the stuff right here. And I'm just going to play both of these Tampa Bay running backs. Prefer, again, Rachaad White for that pass game role. They have similar rushing roles, better passing role for Rachaad White and Bucky Irving getting higher projected ownership. So I'll lean more into Rachaad White, but I like both of them quite a bit. All right. Eric says, "Let's go Mets." I have no issue with that. Don't really know who's even playing in the MLB playoffs right now. I have not been paying attention to baseball since both the Twins and the Cubs were eliminated. Do I have any other notes on these running backs? I think I've said it already. I'm willing to play them both in the same lineup. Just hope that they're able to run all over Atlanta, both at pretty nice price tags, Bucky Irving and Rachaad White. So yeah, I'd say in general, I'm leaning into the running backs quite a bit on this slate, probably overweight to all except for Algier. And Algier just a little bit, maybe 8% lower than the field overall. So I do like the running backs on this slate. All right, let's move on, talk about some wide receivers. Deek says, incoming Rachaad White game where he gets 7 catches with an ADOT of -0.2. I'd take that. I'd take that all day. I'll take the low ADOT on Rachaad White. Those are easy catches if you can get the -0.2 ADOT. What's up, Zell? Yeah, we'll talk about receivers now, but yes, I do have some interest in Cody Thompson. All right, let's move over to. Did I already change this? Yes, I already changed to the receivers. So let's take a look at the top projections here, and we'll start there on the Tampa Bay side. Chris Godwin, this is looking like a Chris Godwin slate now. I think the field is seeing that too. Actually, let's take a look at projected ownership right away. Let's start with the top two, Chris Godwin and Mike Evans, and just compare those. So as you can see here, Chris Godwin projects over 2.5 fantasy points better than Mike Evans. He's also cheaper than Mike Evans. So you would expect Chris Godwin to be chalkier than Mike Evans. Let's see if that is actually the case. Godwin projected for 12% captain ownership. Evans projected for 8% captain ownership. I think I like both of those numbers. So I think this is another slate where I'm going to end up kind of leaning into a subset of like 7 or 8 captains and then just kind of avoiding the rest. So that would be, I think I'll have some of both quarterbacks for sure. Bijan Robinson, Rachaad White, Bucky Irving. I do like both Evans and Godwin. I like these numbers at captain. Maybe I'm wrong. Now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, well, I kind of like Drake London, kind of like Darnell Mooney. So maybe I will be more spread out. I'll think about who I'm fading at captain so I can be overweight on so many. I don't think I'm going to be overweight on Baker Mayfield, probably a little bit lower. Anyway, we'll get back to just talking about the receivers for now. Mike Evans, 8%. I think that's a fine number for Mike Evans. I don't know that I'll be significantly over that. Probably maybe I'll set a rule to have at least 10% and just like get to exactly 10% because he's not going to project very well point per dollar. I'd probably just have exactly 10% if I set a minimum there. Chris Godwin, though, 12%. I am going to like that quite a bit. I'm going to come in overweight to the field on Chris Godwin. Probably set a rule to have at least 15, maybe 20% Chris Godwin. And I'll show you why. I mean, you can see he projects a little bit better than Mike Evans, as you might expect. And actually, we can look at flex ownership as well. Mike Evans, 37% projected flex ownership. Chris Godwin, 39%. Here, I would be probably underweight to this 37% for Mike Evans, overweight to 39% for Chris Godwin. Now, clearly Mike Evans can outscore Chris Godwin even when it sets up to be a Chris Godwin game. Mike Evans has just shown the upside to have 100 yards, 2 touchdowns, break the 40 fantasy points in a game. We know that that's in Mike Evans's bag, but Chris Godwin appears set for a better game here, and the reason for that is if you search over here by sort by wide receiver expected fantasy points allowed. Atlanta is 7th overall in terms of fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. Schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed to wide receivers, but it's actually a bad matchup for wide receivers lining up out wide. AJ Terrell, you would expect to be on Mike Evans. Kind of a negative matchup there. Now, Mike Evans is the type of receiver I think can beat anybody. So I'm not writing him off entirely. Again, probably going to be slightly overweight to Mike Evans in the captain spot. I'm going to be a little bit, maybe I'll have 25, 30% in the flex. I don't want to put myself in a situation where Mike Evans has that monster game and it just completely cooks me. But going to be a little light on Mike Evans because it's as you can see, your bad matchup for wide receivers lining up out wide, whereas in the slot, best in the entire league. So Chris Godwin, 65% route participation on the year, somewhere around there. I think Adam said it was 69% last week. I guess I could pull that up, but anyway, he's been playing a lot in the slot in general this year, and this is a best possible matchup for slot receivers. I think he's going to continue running a lot from the slot tonight, even with the changes. Sterling Shepard ran more outside last week, so I would anticipate Chris Godwin continues his role running routes from the slot, and just a great matchup for slot receivers. He has been targeted quite a bit this year, and if you can pull up for the entire season what things look like for the Bucs here. Godwin, actually Evans slightly ahead of Godwin in terms of route participation, but Godwin is leading in terms of targets on the year. Evans has that larger ADOT. So again, he has the ability to just have 1 or 2 huge plays that entirely break the slate. But the lower ADOT for Chris Godwin means he's going to be able to catch more of them. You can see that in the catch rate over here, 82% catch rate for Chris Godwin, 67% for Mike Evans. That's kind of what you would expect. Evans being a little bit more boom bust than Godwin. Godwin should have some short targets, elite matchup against the Atlanta defense from the slot. So in general, looking at this stuff, I prefer Godwin slightly, but we also know, got to put my camera back on. We also know that Evans can absolutely break a slate very easily. So I'm a little bit scared to take any stand this way because, I think there's a part of me that just wants to be like, well, I just want to ignore that and just say, if Evans is going to get lower ownership, I'll lean into that because I know he can absolutely destroy a slate. But we're not really seeing that. We're kind of seeing that Evans is pretty close to Godwin in terms of ownership. So if they're going to be the same ownership, then I think you just kind of have to lean into the player with the better matchup a little bit. So that is the way I'm going. I'm going to be heavier on Godwin than Evans for sure, leaning into that matchup a bit. All right. Manola asks, how often do you fade both quarterbacks? What type of game script lends itself to fading both quarterbacks? So I often will have, honestly, I'll have 50 lineups and I'll have most slates. I'm going to have some lineups that don't have either quarterback in them. I would say in general, low scoring games favor having no quarterbacks, again, because they don't rack up PPR points. So like in a low scoring game, the position players are just getting that point for every reception they have. A short 5-yard catch, is worth 1.5 fantasy points to the receiver, and it's worth less than 1 fantasy point, less than half. Wait, sorry. Did I say 10-yard? I forget what I said. 5-yard catch would be worth a 0.2 fantasy points to a quarterback. It's worth 1.5 fantasy points to the wide receiver. So it's much easier for receiving players to outscore the quarterback until you get to touchdowns. When the quarterback's like the only real ways quarterbacks can put up major fantasy points is with touchdowns, or if they reach 300 passing yards, that kind of thing, they can get points that way. But if they're getting to 300 passing yards, it's probably going to be a higher scoring game. So generally it's low scoring games more viable to be fading the quarterbacks. Yeah, absolutely. I would sit in the garage and drink a beer with you. Not tonight though, because I'm going to be up probably till 3 or 4 a.m. Working tonight. So holding off on the beer for now. All right. What else? So I think that kind of covers my breakdown of Godwin and Evans. Better matchup for Godwin. Seems like ownership is going to be pretty comparable. So I'm going to split that way. I'm going to be a little bit underweight to Evans, a little bit overweight to Godwin. Now we have the other interesting thing is we have Jalen McMillan and Trey Palmer both out for this game, which really elevates Sterling Shepard up to the wide receiver 3 role on Tampa Bay. He's only 1,600. So Sterling Shepard just looks really great here. And I think I already mentioned this. He was running, let me double check myself, but I believe I looked this up and he was running more out wide last week. So they were letting Chris Godwin stay in his slot role. So as long as Sterling Shepard is the wide receiver 3 here, I think we can anticipate that things are going to stay that way. Yeah, Sterling Shepard, 33% in, I think this is whatever other week he played, just 14% from the slot last week, 86% from out wide. So I assume the plan is to keep Chris Godwin in that slot role, have Sterling Shepard playing out wide. So not the best matchup, but he's only 1,600 running as the wide receiver 3. Last I looked, also not getting a ton of ownership. But let me double check if anything has changed on that front. Sorting by ownership here. Shepard coming in at just 11% projected ownership, and you'll see why. Some of the reason is a lot of other pretty solid cheap options on this slate, but I like that. I like that number quite a bit for Sterling Shepard. I imagine I'll be overweight to 11%. This is probably a spot where I'm going to lean into Sterling Shepard, which honestly could lead to me. I think I might end up light on Baker Mayfield in the flex. Actually, 10% in the captain. I might end up a little bit light overall on Baker Mayfield. Might end up a little bit light on. Well, we had low ownership on Roto-Grinders on Kirk Cousins, so I think I'll end up higher there. But I think Sterling Shepard, 11% projected ownership, feels light to me for a wide receiver 3 at 1,600. Doesn't need to do all that much to pay off his salary. So the pretty clear next option, I like him quite a bit. The other receivers on the Bucs, we have Cameron Johnson and Cody Thompson. Cameron Johnson projecting a little bit better than Cody Thompson, both projected for under 5% ownership. I saw somebody ask that about that earlier. Yeah, I have interest in both. So Cameron Johnson actually had a role last week. I think probably Cameron Johnson works as the wide receiver 4 here. Not a guarantee, but last week was the wide receiver 4, ran 9 routes, 18% route participation, saw 1 target in that game. He is, and I didn't know who he was before yesterday, but I looked it up. Very fast rookie. I think he's somebody that could, have a splash play or two at 200, would pay off his salary pretty easily. Could very easily be a 0. Again, wide receiver 4, you're not expecting a ton from a wide receiver 4, but I would anticipate that he probably gets out there a little bit. And if he does, catch a long ball, I think he could put up a big score. Cody Thompson, a veteran, there is a non-zero chance that he is the wide receiver 4 instead. Also coming in at under 5% ownership. Hard for me to know exactly how to break the tie for those two, because we don't really know who's going to act as a wide receiver 4. We don't really know how valuable that wide receiver 4. I mean, it's probably not an extremely valuable role anyway. I think both of them, you can treat them sort of the way you treat a backup tight end who, probably not going to have a huge role for the team, could have a big score, might have an opportunity or two. And if they do, maybe it's a touchdown. I think probably Cameron Johnson is the slightly better bet to have a big play if he gets an opportunity, just because he's kind of the speeder guy. He played a little bit more last week, so I have I guess a slight preference for Cameron Johnson, but that also might have been he happened to be playing because he's involved in special teams. So it is possible, I think, that Cody Thompson steps in, takes over that wide receiver 4 role since he is active this week. They did call him up, so who knows if they're calling up just to be kind of an insurance play, or if they actually want to use him ahead of Cameron Johnson. I don't know. I think we're sort of guessing about Cameron Johnson and Cody Thompson, but I think both are decent plays at sub 5% ownership. This is also a slate where we don't have many plays at low ownership that are great. I mean, it's basically the Tampa Bay receivers. I'm sorted by ownership here. Once you get under, Kyle Pitts at 17%, we'll talk about that. You've got the kickers, the defenses, and then as far as really low owned plays, I mean, Shepard at 11%. It's Cody Thompson, Cameron Johnson. They are, I think, pretty easily to me the better options than any other. I guess Warner you could consider, but there's not that many playable like low owned plays on this slate. It just really is a condensed kind of slate. So I think they're players that I would have certainly in a 150 set. I'll probably have a couple shares of each of them, but I'd be lying if I told you that I think either of them is like likely to have a big score. I think I like them because they're coming in at low ownership. I don't know if either of them is going to have any kind of significant opportunity. I think Sterling Shepard is the one that I would anticipate having, just taking on that wide receiver 3 role, actually having opportunities out there, and he's still only getting 11% ownership. So I do like Sterling Shepard. Imagine I'll be over 11%, maybe even pretty significantly. As far as Thompson and Johnson go, I think both are playable, but not huge priorities. More like the backup tight end variety, where it's like if they happen to have that one big play, man, you're going to be excited to have them. Not many people are going to have them. You can really set yourself apart from the field, a way to get unique on a slate that it's going to be tough to be unique. I think they kind of fit that bill, but I don't think they're like neither of them going to have 60% route participation. I wouldn't think. I think Sterling Shepard should continue to play ahead of both of them. So that's kind of, I think that's all I have to say about those Tampa receivers. Trey Palmer is out again. And then as far as the Atlanta receivers, obviously Drake London projects the best, 8,800, 16.1 fantasy point projection. I guess we can look at his ownership here in the captain spot. We've got Drake London coming in at 12% ownership. In the flex, Drake London coming in at 38% ownership. Both of those numbers seem fine to me. I probably end up pretty close to the field. I don't think I'm taking any major stand there. I do prefer Godwin over London in the captain spot. Also more expensive though. Godwin is $1,200 more expensive than Drake London. Not taking any huge stand on Drake London. Looking at the season as a whole, Drake London 31 targets. Leads the team in targets, second on the team in route participation at 87.3%. Pretty solid role there, obviously, for Drake London as the wide receiver 1. I believe it has gotten a little bit better in recent weeks as well. Only had 3 targets in week 1, 12 targets last week, 9 targets in week 3. So things kind of trending in the right direction for Drake London. Atlanta kind of leaning on him more the past couple games than the first couple games. 10 targets in weeks 1 and 2, 21 targets weeks 3 and 4 overall. So you can see the role has gotten better for Drake London. He's expensive, probably should be getting ownership, probably should be. I don't think there's much more that I need to say about Drake London. It's not the best matchup in the world. Again, going to schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed by Tampa Bay. Bottom 10 matchup in the league. I think that's across the board. Yeah, it's across the board for receivers. It's a negative matchup here for receivers against Tampa Bay. So not really leaning into it, but the role is nice. Talented receiver. Kirk Cousins maybe gets going a little bit. I think I'm kind of just playing where the field is with Drake London, which again, about 50% of lineups will have Drake London in there somewhere. I think he's a pretty solid play, but I'm not taking any huge stand there. Darnell Mooney doesn't project that well. 7,200 projection for 11.5. Not a great projection there. The role pretty strong for Darnell Mooney. Leads the team in route participation 90.5%. Second on the team with 23 targets. Only 1 target more than Ray McLeod on the year. But again, if you break it down by game, it's been a little bit better recently for Darnell Mooney. 8 targets in week 3, 6 targets in week 4, 6 targets in week 2. Just had that week 1 only had 3 targets. Ray McLeod had 7 in that one. So the past few weeks, he has separated a little bit from Ray McLeod. We know Darnell Mooney is has that kind of big play upside. Looking at the ADOTs here, Darnell Mooney, ADOT of 12.4, Ray McLeod down at 7.9. So a little bit of separation in terms of where they're being targeted. As you would, you actually, Ray McLeod, yeah, just a slightly higher catch rate. You would expect a little separation in terms of the catch rate here. It's actually not all that different. Ray McLeod just slightly better catch rate than Darnell Mooney on the season. I think both are pretty strong plays in a vacuum, running all the routes. Again, it's condensed. Like Atlanta just doesn't really use a fourth receiver. They're basically just Drake London, Ray McLeod, and Darnell Mooney, which makes all of them pretty solid plays. As far as ownership goes, we have in the flex, Darnell Mooney 28%, Ray McLeod 32%. So not all that different in terms of ownership, despite the fact that Ray McLeod is less than half the price of Darnell Mooney. I prefer, I'll probably be above weight to 32% Ray McLeod. It's come up enough that I'm not going to take a huge stand there, but I imagine I'll be a little bit above weight to Ray McLeod. Darnell Mooney probably about even with the field, maybe even a little bit light there. And in the captain spot, we have Ray McLeod at 7% ownership, Darnell Mooney at 5% ownership. There, I think I prefer Darnell Mooney for that big play upside. Ray McLeod, I don't know. I don't know if he has the ability to totally break the slate. I also think Ray McLeod, my concern would be you're going to be funneled into, like, I think people are going to use Ray McLeod as a way to get to a bunch of studs. So they'll have Ray McLeod, and the captain allows you to play a bunch of the best plays elsewhere in the lineup. And we've seen it can work. I think if you play a lineup that uses the full salary cap with Ray McLeod in the captain spot, probably going to be duped quite a bit. If you're like 49.8 or higher in terms of salary, you're probably going to be duped quite a bit. Maybe you can accept that. We've seen it win. You can still win. I think we actually saw that win pretty significant money, like 70,000 a couple weeks ago. So didn't end up being as duped as I might have anticipated it being. Maybe the field is out leveling itself. Maybe you can consider it. Normally, I would expect it to be pretty highly owned if you have Ray McLeod in captain using close to the full salary. But maybe tides have shifted enough with the DFS landscape. All right. Do I have any other notes here on Atlanta? I don't think so. It's not a great matchup, but again, the price tag on Ray McLeod, just awesome, 3,400. Tough to get away from. The field's not really getting there either. It's coming in at sub 40% ownership for a pretty solid roll at 3,400. I'll probably lean into it a little bit. Mooney, probably I'll be a little bit light in the flex, maybe a little higher at captain. I think that does it for receivers. Let me check in any questions here. All right. Let's go. Yeah, well, I guess we can. Cousins 4 interceptions through 4 games. Yeah, I think Bucs defense looks pretty good. All right, let's go. Ban this user. Yeah, exactly. Got to leave some salary, I think, if you use Ray at captain. One lineup, who you going with on FanDuel? I'll take a look at FanDuel in a minute. Let me get through the DraftKings plays first, and then I'll look over. I'll move over and look at FanDuel salaries. My guess is that it would be Bijan in the captain at FanDuel, but that's probably higher owned. If he's significantly higher owned than Godwin, I might flip it to Godwin. All right, and then let's move on. Talk about tight ends here. All right. Interesting slate for tight ends. K. Dotton, as you can see here, has actually flipped Kyle Pitts in terms of projection at fantasy points. The Roto-Grinders projection sort of surprised me. I'm actually going to refresh one more time. Had a much higher projection than I anticipated on Kyle Pitts. Would love to hear the reasoning behind that, but let me just double check if it's still the case here. Yeah, still projecting Kyle Pitts really high here, 13.8 fantasy point projection. If you're projecting Kyle Pitts at 13.8 fantasy points and 17% ownership, he looks like a smash play based on this. I think around the industry, he typically has a little bit of a lighter projection. Actually, I'm just going to look one more place right now to make sure I'm not. Yeah, everywhere else has him sub 10% ownership. So, and it's tough for me to project Kyle Pitts that high. I'm sure they have their reasons for doing it that way, but man, that's a high projection for somebody who just has not done that much this year. Now let's take a look at the tight ends a little bit, and actually before we get into the usage, let's just take a look at the schedule adjusted scores. I think it's been a pretty bad matchup for both tight ends. Atlanta, second worst matchup for tight ends so far in terms of schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed, and Tampa Bay looks like is bottom 10 or 11 or so. So not a great matchup for either of these tight ends. Small enough sample size that I don't care all that much about it. Tight ends have just scored so few fantasy points in general that I think, one touchdown here or there could make a huge difference in terms of schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed so far. So not really worried about these numbers at this point in the season, with tight ends being such a low volume position so far this year. Let's take a look at, and part of the reason that I'm afraid of Kyle Pitts is you just look at his usage every week of the year. Week 1, 78.6% rep participation. Week 2, 71%. So a drop off there. Week 3, 64.5%. Another drop off. Week 4, 58.3%. The team does not seem to have a lot of faith in Kyle Pitts. The route participation going down. He's gotten 3 or 4 targets every single game, so steady as far as that goes. Hard to get too excited about it. We saw him almost have a huge play. I think it was, were they playing the Chiefs when he had that like 50-yarder, got tackled at the 1. That's tough. That's tough to see him tackle at the 1. So close to having that big Pitts game, but yeah, it's. Starkindler says Pitts is Jover. Kind of feels like Pitts might be Jover at this point. RIP my best ball bags. Not looking good there. If he is coming in at, and again, projected even with the strong projection, Rotogranus hasn't projected for 17% ownership. I still think he's playable at 17% ownership. Not like a slam dunk play. Only getting three or 4 targets per game so far this year. I'm not really sure that that's going to change. I think he might just be a 3 or 4 target player. That's at least my worry at this point. And if he's a 3 or 4 target player, this is actually maybe even too much ownership. I don't know. I'm certainly not leaning into Kyle Pitts here. I've done it. I've made the mistake already this year of leaning into Kyle Pitts when he had a nice matchup, and it didn't work out. 2% captain ownership. Viable. I again don't even think I'm leading into that. Maybe it's a place you could. Only 8.4K in the captain spot. I'm not going out of my way to play a ton of Kyle Pitts here. The role is bad enough. Seeing it, on trending the wrong direction. I'm not going to be leaning into Kyle Pitts here. But I think overall probably end up similar to the field on Kyle Pitts. I think he's a fine enough play. All right. Outside of Kyle Pitts, I mean, Charlie Warner, I guess, for the Falcons would be the other one that you could consider. But man, still not looking great on the year. Just 2 targets in week 1. Hasn't had a target since week 1. I don't think I'm going to go there. I think I actually prefer the Bucs receivers we talked about earlier. I think I'd be more inclined to go to those Bucs receivers. There's a non-zero chance that one of them overtakes Sterling Shepard, or they have multiple outs to get in there with injury. I don't anticipate that happening, but I think there are more outs for the Bucs receivers than Charlie Warner. So I'd rather just go there, I think. Who else at tight end? So we just went over the Atlanta tight ends. Yeah, I think Kyle Pitts fine. Tampa Bay, Cade Otton, 4,000 price tag. Pretty solid role for Cade Otton so far this year. He is 3rd on the team in route participation, 69.5%. 3rd on the team with 20 targets. He's, it's as I said, pretty condensed here, and he's one of the players who it condenses towards. So 4,000 price tag for Cade Otton, even in what is on paper a tougher matchup with Atlanta. I like it, but let's take a look at the ownership on Cade Otton. That's obviously a pretty big factor in how much we like a Cade Otton. 3% projected ownership. I think I like that better than the Pitts ownership at captain. Still not a huge stand. I might not actually end up with any Cade Otton at captain, but I think that's a fine play. Similar to Ray McLeod, you'd probably want to leave some salary on the table if you use him at captain. And then in the flex, where's Kate Otten? 22%. I like that. I think that's a really solid number for Kate Otten. Similar to Ray McLeod, just I like the roll there for Kate Otten. Ownership a little bit lower than it probably should be for a player who's been targeted 20 times already this year. So yeah, I think I probably end up overweight to the field on Kate Otten. I don't think I play the backup tight end Payne Durham. Yeah, he's 1,200. He's not even min priced. I'd probably go to Charlie Warner before I go to Payne Durham, cheaper and projects better, but I probably just prefer to go to the receivers anyway. Maybe you could make a case. Maybe they go more 12 personnel with their starting receivers out, but I kind of doubt that. I think more inclined to go to the receivers there. So that will do it for tight end. As far as kickers and defenses, not getting a ton of ownership. So I'll say that for the kickers and defenses. We have, let's see, in the flex, Younghoe Koo, 17% projected ownership. Anybody? No, he's the highest of the kickers and defenses. Falcons defense, 17% projected ownership. Bucs defense, 16% projected ownership. They get Vita Vea back, as noted earlier. That's kind of interesting. And then where is McLaughlin, 17% projected ownership. I do think my favorite of the group is probably, the game is in Atlanta, but I still think probably the Bucs defense with Vita Vea back is probably the best bet. They're the cheapest, getting the lowest ownership, and they've been a pretty solid defense so far this year. So, yeah, I think Buccaneers defense I do like a little bit, probably better than what the field is playing at 16%. In general, it's so tough to predict kickers and defenses that it's hard for me to take a strong stance here. Younghoe Koo, 17% projected ownership. He's one. I listened to the ETR show earlier. Cody was saying that Younghoe Koo tends to end up higher ownership than what they project for. He's just one of those like fan favorite kickers in general. So we might see that come in a little bit higher than it is projecting for. I don't know. I'm not taking any huge stands on kickers and defenses here. I think the ownership is in kind of a range that seems fine to me. Maybe I end up higher on the Bucs, but yeah, not taking any major stands on kickers and defenses on this slate. Yeah, Peppertoni says feels like a coup game. Absolutely could be. Man, the bots. I forgot I was going to talk to Baldy about being a mod, but yeah, probably need a mod for all the bots coming in lately. Otten 2 TDs, Andrew says, yeah, could happen for sure. All right. Outside of that, let's see here. Questions and lineups. I'll take any questions anybody has. I think I covered all of the information that I was meaning to cover here, but still willing to take any questions if you have them. Otherwise, I will play around with building some lineups. Oh, we did have a FanDuel question. Maybe I'll take a look at FanDuel real quick before we get into building some DraftKings lineups. I'll take a sip of water here. All right, MVP projected ownership. All right, Baker, 21%. Totally fine there. Bijan, 19%. Godwin, 11%. So yeah, I think Godwin, probably my favorite captain at 11%. That's a really nice number on Godwin for a solid matchup here. Evans, 8%. I like that quite a bit on FanDuel, where you not really a PPR thing. He's a big play kind of guy. So Evans at 8% on FanDuel. I like that. I think that's a strong number. 7% on London seems okay. I kind of like 3.5% on Rachaad White. I actually think could end up having a really nice game here. But both White and Bucky Irving projecting for around 3.5%. I think as far as contrarian captains go, neither of them is going to get much ownership at their price tags, and I think one could end up separating. So I do like the idea as far as contrarian captains go of Rachaad White, Bucky Irving, just in the largest field GPPs. This is, I guess, a good time to insert the disclaimer that all of my analysis revolves around large field GPPs. So I'm obviously sharing a lot of information that can be applicable to every different type of contest you want to enter, about usage, defenses, and stuff. That applies across the board. But my analysis is always going to be based, the standard is going to be large field GPPs, because those are the tournaments I play. So when I'm talking about getting different, doing things that maybe don't intuitively make sense, it's because I'm trying to avoid duplicates, get to lineups that I think have a chance to win, but with players that maybe the field isn't getting to in those largest field GPPs. So that is why I might consider somebody like Rachaad White, Bucky Irving, not like cash game plays, not tournaments of 10 players. I don't think you need to do this. But if you're playing against 100,000 different entries in a contest, I think they become really interesting plays to potentially separate yourself from the field. Darnell Mooney, actually 3% ownership. I really like that as well on FanDuel. I think he's got that kind of big play upside. Again, actually has a pretty good catch rate on the year, about the same as Ray McLeod. But generally, just we know Darnell Mooney has that big play upside, so I do have some interest there. If I were making one lineup, I think probably my MVP would be Chris Godwin, though. 11% ownership feels really nice for Godwin, even on a half PPR site instead of full PPR. Obviously, I think he looks even better on a full PPR site, but on half PPR, I still think very playable. Nice matchup here for Chris Godwin. So probably my favorite, followed by Bijan. And then, if I want to go full contrarian, probably go down to, I actually I think this would be a slate where I'd probably be pretty spread out in terms of exposure, which I guess the field is too. So that's not like a hot take here. We don't have anybody getting more than 21% MVP ownership. But I think we have a lot of solid options on FanDuel at relatively low ownership. As far as flex options go, and this is where I like to get weird sometimes in the flex on FanDuel, because you can often find players that have a really good chance of putting up a flex-worthy score that nobody wants to play on FanDuel because the pricing is not quite as restrictive in general. Sterling Shepard at 8% on FanDuel. I love that for Sterling Shepard. Again, just one big play can pay off his $7,000 price tag. Easier to keep up with a player with high volume on FanDuel because it's half PPR as full as instead of full PPR on DraftKings. So these players like Sterling Shepard look better on FanDuel to me, even than on DraftKings, and at lower ownership. So I like Sterling Shepard. Cameron Johnson, Cody Thompson, same kind of thing as on DraftKings. I guess Cody Thompson cheaper than Cameron Johnson here, so maybe that's a little extra bonus for Cody Thompson on FanDuel. But really, you need them probably to score a touchdown to pay off the price tag. I don't think they're going to get there with a ton of volume. I think that does it for FanDuel analysis. I like this 17% Rachaad White in the flex. I like that as well. So going to probably lean into Rachaad White on both sites. Where is and Bucky? Yeah, Bucky coming in pretty high on 17%. He's 10.5K for Rachaad White. Bucky is 10K. Interesting that Bucky's getting so much more ownership. I would probably just lean more into Rachaad White, but like both of them for sure. Okay. I think that does it. Let's see. Let me check in on questions, then I'll try and build a couple lineups here. Get rid of the bot, the latest bot. That's funny. Justin. Yes, you trade Rico Dowdle for Jalen Waddle in season long. Absolutely. Maybe other people have different opinions than I do, but I would. If you're playing in a tournament with less than 1K entries, how should you change your strategy? You just don't need to leave as much salary on the table, and you don't need to get as weird. So I would probably exclude players like Johnson and Thompson from your player pool. I think I'd rather just go to the more sure things like Kate Otten. Sure thing is still relative, but like I'd be more inclined to just play Sterling Shepard and don't even think about Thompson or Johnson in a field of 1,000 or less, because you really don't need to get that different. You also don't need to hit the absolute nuts in a field of 1,000. So things like when I say Baker Mayfield in the captain spot, I'm always double stacking. I still think you probably want to in a field of 1K, but probably not quite as you don't need to hit the nuts. So if he gets there in the captain spot and you don't know who he's going to throw to, not the end of the world. Like because Baker Mayfield has those outs of, well, nobody in the contest will have Cameron Johnson. I don't remember their names. Which ones with Thompson or Johnson in their lineups. So you could have Baker Mayfield in the captain without double stacking him in a smaller field, because nobody's going to have those players, or it's pretty unlikely that anybody is going to have the nuts. So you're more likely to be able to win with Baker single stacked from the captain spot, because he has those outs of, well, what if he throws a touchdown to Thompson, Johnson, players that nobody else in your field has? He's still getting those points. You're not losing out to teams that have him. So you can get a little bit looser with some of the rules in smaller field contests. Puka for Wicks, man. That's all right. I'll let other people handle the season long questions. I don't think I would, but that's man, it gets tougher. I think Christian Watson coming back at some point. Yeah, I don't think I could do it. Okay, let's play around with some. I thought I had DraftKings pulled up here, but I guess I didn't. All right, let me pull up DraftKings. And let's see, NFL Showdown. Just build a couple, see how they look. All right, so as I mentioned earlier, I think I like Rachaad White at captain. I like Bijan, Rachaad White, Godwin, some of my favorite captains. Let's try a Rachaad White at captain, and I want to do one that has Rachaad White at captain with Bucky Irving in it as well. I think that is a way that you can kind of avoid duplicates to some extent. Probably not, entirely. People will have it. The field has sharpened up enough that people will have this lineup. But I think Rachaad White at captain, Bucky Irving in the lineup. I like. Let's just throw some favorites in here. I talked about how much I like Bijan Robinson. I like Chris Godwin. So now we have 4 of my favorite plays in here already. Now, what if we go to, so we have 13,600 left over. So here you could go to, if we go to Ray McLeod, man, so you put Ray McLeod in there suddenly. I mean, you're using your full salary cap. This is a lineup that, even with the double running back for Tampa Bay, I would anticipate this being pretty highly duped. It's obviously a lineup that looks nice, has a lot of great projected plays in it. But this is one that, if you win, you're going to win probably $15,000 instead of $200,000, whatever it is. So it's it'll be duped, but this is strong projected lineup. If we want to go to a lesser duped lineup, instead of Mike Evans, what if we put in Drake London there? Suddenly you're leaving 1,400 on the table. This is going to be significantly less duped. Mike Evans has a tough matchup, so does Drake London. So this would be a way that, I could see Drake London pretty easily outscoring Mooney, Cousins, Mayfield, Evans, all the players that you could fit in instead of him. So I think this is a viable large field GPP lineup. Now, obviously, always keep in mind this 1,400 could be spent everywhere and anywhere else in your lineup. So you also have to, you can't just say, okay, Drake London outscores these, you're good to go. You also have to think, okay, can Ray McLeod outscore everybody up to 4,800? Can Chris Godwin outscore everybody up to, I mean, we don't have anybody 11,400, but you have to think about it for every spot of your lineup. In this case, I think so. I think he could outscore all of them up to 4,800. It's kickers, defenses, no outstanding. Tyler Algier would be, you need Ray McLeod to outscore Tyler Algier. I certainly think he can outscore Algier. You need Bucky Irving to outscore everybody up to 7,800. So we need to outscore Mooney, which I think he is capable of doing. So yeah, I think this is kind of large field GPP lineup that I like. You could also, it might be even more unique for this lineup to actually pay 200 more and play Mike Evans instead of Godwin, because I think the field is going to be, heavier on Godwin. Maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But another, way to play that. I prefer Godwin in a vacuum. I'm going to have some Evans exposure as well. So here's a lineup that I think some ways to build for large field GPP is just leaving a little bit of salary on the table, still playing a lot of very solid plays. Let me check in on questions. Any other types of lineups? Maybe I'll do one more here if you have any types of lineups you'd like me to try to build. Oni Swaba says Mooney over McLeod. That could be. All right, let's see. Anybody? The Thunder. This is the optimizer that I was showing earlier is the Roto Grinders Lineup HQ. If you want $10 off the NFL package, link is in the description of this video. I should mention I'm also using All the other tools I'm using here are fantasy points tools, the fantasy points data suite, fantasy points schedule adjusted fantasy point per game, matrix, all of that. You can get fantasy points 25% off any package using promo code Flannelman if you're interested in checking that out. All right, let me see any other. Baker captain with Godwin, Evans, Shepard. All right, let's try that. I think that's a good idea. Baker captain with Godwin, Evans, and Sterling Shepard. Let's rock it. All right, Baker Mayfield, captain, Evans, Godwin. You're getting low in salary, and then you throw in a $1,600 Sterling Shepard. Suddenly you're looking good. Probably don't do like you could add Otten here, and then get to Bijan Robinson. Actually, that would fit perfectly. I feel like that's probably a little bit much. That is looking at the ETR. Their data was showing, I think, pretty low ownership on a 5-man Tampa stack. So this, in terms of the stack type, this would be low ownership, but I expect that this particular lineup, because it's using the full salary and it's all the obvious plays from Tampa, I actually think that this lineup itself would probably be pretty duped despite being a unique construction. So maybe I'd go away from Otten here and go to, you could obviously go to Ray McLeod. That's probably still duped a bit. Here's one where, I don't think it's going to be super, ton of people are going to have that trio with Baker at captain. Could we go, where else could we go here with 4,000 left over? I guess here's one where's Atlanta? Oh, the Falcons defense is too expensive, so you couldn't do that. Could do the Buccaneers defense. I still think that will probably be kind of owned. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not loving it just from a dupes perspective. Obviously, you could throw Gotten in there, eat the dupes, would be fine. Otherwise, you go away from Bijan. I guess that's one thing you could do. Go away from Bijan, go to Drake London, then throw Cade Otton in there, or Falcons defense. I think would actually bring down the dupes a little bit. So now you're leaving 600 on the table. You've got the Falcons defense against the Tampa Bay stack. Suddenly, I think this is a lineup that you would avoid some dupes. Still projects pretty well. Still has a lot of great plays in it. So I think this is a way that maybe you could build a Baker captain stack with that trio of receivers. All right, I am I got under 20 minutes left to make my lineup. So I better get out and make some lineups here. How do you feel about Shepard at captain? If you use Shepard at captain, I would just leave salary on the table. I don't love it. Like you need your captain to put up a significant number of points. So I don't love Shepard at captain. I prefer him in the flex in general. All right, I am going to head out. I need to go make some lineups. Just seeing if I had any other questions that I needed to get to. I don't think so. I think we're good. Okay, yeah. You didn't send me a lineup, so. If you in the next 10 seconds, if you send me the lineup, I can tell you if it's great. Oh, Robertson captain, Bijan Robinson captain. I like that. Yes, I like Bijan captain. I don't think I can wait for this lineup. I'm sorry. I need to get to my lineups. Don't have enough time left. White Godwin, loving it so far. This Pitts, sure. Yep. No issues with this lineup. Are there any quarterbacks in it? It says Robinson captain, White, Godwin, Pitts, London. I think this is viable still. You've got White and Otten. Yeah, no, that sounds like perfectly fine. I'm not checking salaries or anything, but in a vacuum, that sounds like a totally fine lineup. All right, if you haven't already, please do like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, trying to grow the channel, and comment. All of that is very good. Really appreciate you all of your support throughout the season. I'm going to go make some lineups. Hopefully one of us or all of us, let's all win some money tonight. Thanks, guys. And I'll catch you on Thursday. Sorry, catch you on Sunday.